it is my great pleasure to be with Amy Bruckman today, Professor Amy Bruckman, and to talk about her fascinating book, Should You Believe Wikipedia? Um, a question that I know has crossed many people's minds, but the book really explores a number of aspects of what has become now our daily lives, our interactions online, our membership and belonging in communities, in online communities with people we've never met in person, the social creation of knowledge, and indeed whether we should believe Wikipedia and many other platforms that use the power of crowds. So I could not be any more excited because these are things that not only I've spent some time thinking about and writing about, but the things that really have shaped all of our lives. So thank you so much, Amy, for being here
Thank you
today.
for having me.
Um, Amy, for those of you who don't know, she studied physics as an undergrad at Harvard and then went on to MIT for her grad school in the media lab. And then she's had just a terrific career as a professor at Georgia Tech. And again, digging into some pretty darn good questions. One of the things that caught my attention when I read the book is at a time where we like to sort of just criticize all the terrible things that social media and online interaction has created in our lives, and there's a lot of it. But you start your book by highlighting some forms of online interaction and communities that are actually pretty good, and they do good things for us. And so since we were going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, give us some examples of some of these interactions that do a good job, and why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that our understanding of how to design online environments is still early. And I teach a class called Design of Online Communities. I'm teaching it this semester. And I teach my students that the design decisions you make change the kind of human social interaction that emerges. And there are lots of wonderful examples of really positive interaction among people in an online community. Uh, my children, when they were little, had life-threatening food allergies. And I went on a site for parents of kids with food allergies because I wanted to figure out how to bake a birthday cake for my son who couldn't have milk or egg. And I met this group of people who knew everything I needed to know. And in addition to giving me a fantastic cake recipe, also became friends. There are the technology has the power to bring people together in ways that are powerfully supportive and in ways that are important.
One of the things that caught my attention, and you've gone through literature outside of computer science, if you will, to find answers, and including this research on third places, right? What can we learn about the neighborhood pub and what's good about the neighborhood pub, if you will, that can help inform communities that do what you just described?
Well, I will say that someone else at Georgia Tech who has done a great job of applying social science literature to understand knowledge and information is you, sir. And when you're bored of being president, it would be fun to work on that. Third places are, there's this great book. I make my students read this book called The Great Good Place by Ray Oldenburg. And what Oldenburg did was to hang out in places like coffee shops and bars and community centers and understand how the design features create a place, a supportive place. And he argues that we all need a place that is neither work nor home, and that those places play a critical role in our lives. And particularly in a suburban environment, we are increasingly lacking them. And it turns out the internet can fill that gap to some extent in some ways, particularly if we design for it. If we say, this is the kind of social support that helps people to thrive, and how can we enhance that? How can we make a group of people more supportive to one another?
the other thing you talk about in the book is in those third places or those communities that work, how different users play different roles. Now, we all know one of those roles very well, the internet troll. Some of us have suffered the internet troll, but there are many other roles that are incredibly positive in those places, and including this sort of the regular. And what are those roles that somehow make some of these communities work so well?
So, it turns out that sometimes we make the mistake of thinking about our users of online communities as one group. And it turns out that people have different needs and different things that they bring to the environment. So I've been editing Wikipedia for many years. And if you are part of the community of people who edit Wikipedia, you find that people, if they become serious Wikipedians, they often pick something that they're passionate about. So one person will fight vandalism, and another person will make sure all the about boxes are neat and tidy. And another person is a deletionist who thinks that the thing that's wrong with Wikipedia is every 3 people with a band in a garage thinks they should have a Wikipedia page, and enforces rules like you have to have a record on a major label to get a Wikipedia page for your band. And they go through the list of new page creations to get rid of things that aren't notable. People self-select into these different roles and become more and more specialized in them, and everyone contributes in their own way.
So continuing to the good examples, we'll get to some of the not so good, but the examples of how these communities have done great things, very positive things. Wikipedia, which is in the cover of the book. And I don't know if I revealed that I actually know one of the founders of Wikipedia. I've had this. If at the time when Wikipedia was launched, any of us had been told there's going to be an encyclopedia out there for free that anyone can not only read, but write, change, amend. And if they had asked us, what are the chances that that thing will work? We would have said, absolutely. I would have said absolutely zero chance if everybody can change. And here we are. You had the photo in the book of the paper encyclopedia, the World Book.
The World Book, yes.
That we all, some of our parents bought us at great expense to give us access to information. And now those are gone and we have this access. Why does it work? I mean, that's to me what's surprising.
The funny thing is that Jimmy Wales and Larry Sanger were surprised that it worked. They were going to create a relatively traditional internet-based encyclopedia, and they started using Ward Cunningham's wiki technology as a way to do a rough draft. And it caught them by surprise that the rough draft could be the final version. It works for a reason that is deeper than you might think. And this is the reason I wrote the book in the first place, which is I believe that if people understand a little more about theory of knowledge, that you would understand how the internet works and frankly, how the world works in a deeper sense. And so the way we know whether something is true is social. So reality exists, but we're all trapped in our subjective perceptions. So if we're trapped in our subjective perceptions, how do we all know that I'm sitting on a blue chair, which is a slightly different shade of blue than my jacket? And the answer is, if I poll everyone in the audience, you would all agree, chair's blue, jacket's blue, not the same blue. The process of agreeing that something is true is social. Now, can this consensus be wrong? Of course it can be wrong, but it's the best we have access to. So if you think about a peer-reviewed paper in science, 3 experts review it, and then it's set in stone. And if we learn something later, it's hard to fix, hard to update. Now look at a Wikipedia page. Literally thousands of people can edit a page in a matter of days. It's particularly interesting to look at the page of someone who is suddenly elevated from a position of relative obscurity to prominence, like, for example, a new Supreme Court justice in the United States. The page goes from 2 sentences saying so-and-so is a Superior Court judge in this court, to being a week later a complete biography and complete concordance to their entire life. And it happens by thousands of people working in parallel. And if everybody is held to a standard of using reliable references, then it actually is reliable.
You mentioned a couple of anecdotes that I found quite interesting. One is, and I'm embarrassed to admit that I still thought spinach was a good source of iron.
Yeah.
And I was corrected in the book, but because when we sort of maybe put on a pedestal the quality and the truthfulness of scientific knowledge, you pinpoint, wait a second, there are big, notorious, and persistent mistakes that have been propagated by the imperfect peer review process. So
even peer review is not perfect. I love the spinach paper. It was given to me first by Colin Potts, our former vice provost. The spinach paper traces an error that made its way into the academic literature in peer-reviewed references and persisted for 30 years. Someone made the mistake of saying spinach is a good source of iron, and everybody else repeated it. And even the paper correcting the statement that spinach is a good source of iron has an incorrect reference in it. So I think the broader message is to not put scientific publication on a pedestal. And particularly as we become more and more interdisciplinary, any one reviewer is not going to be able to critically evaluate a scientific paper. And hopefully the editor polls reviewers from different disciplines in a complementary way, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Even our peer-reviewed scientific paper, our highest pinnacle of knowledge, is sometimes a little bit off.
Yeah. And then, of course, Wikipedia is not perfect, right? It's an ongoing, unfinished business of improvement. And you mentioned a great anecdote in the book about your grandmother being a model for a mural in the Massachusetts State House, and how you added that into to the entry for the is it the Massachusetts Capitol?
Massachusetts State House.
State House. And you swear it's true.
I swear it's true.
But can't prove it.
That's right.
And that has persisted there as truth because no one cares to edit that page.
That's right.
So when we use Wikipedia, how can we calibrate the level of confidence in information? Is there any trick that you have for us? So
let me finish the punchline to the Massachusetts State House story. So my great uncle was a painter during the Depression and was hired to paint these murals. And he didn't have any money to hire models, so he used everyone in his family. So my grandmother's in there, my great-grandmother's in there, and the guy on one knee and kneeling in the front row is Uncle Freddie. And I put that on Wikipedia relatively early, and nobody messed with it because it was early enough that people were less careful. And right now, if you put something unsourced on Wikipedia, it would be removed relatively quickly in most cases. It's less likely to be removed if it's an obscure page. So honestly, the only person who cares about the murals in the Massachusetts State House is my mother, who is very proud that our whole family is in these murals. If it's an obscure page, it's less likely to be carefully checked. The punchline to the story is the fact that those are the people in the murals now has a citation. And the citation is the book. The book that discusses how this is uncited is now used as the site. But if you're an everyday person looking at a Wikipedia page, the answer is very simple. Look at the citation. Mm-hmm. You're not believing the page, you're using it as a set of citations that you can trace through. And the weakness of Wikipedia is that some of those citations are not strong. And sometimes you can get a citation loop, which is, here's how this happens. Some journalist uses Wikipedia as a source for something they write, and doesn't cite it because that would be embarrassing. Uh, and then later, some Wikipedian says, you know, this statement on this page doesn't have any support. Let me look for references to try and add support. And they find the journalist's article. So it looked like
Circular.
there's support when in fact there never was any.
I
So
see.
weird stuff like that does happen.
Well, let's switch to some of the maybe the uglier side of this business. And by the way, your book has plenty of examples of great outcomes of citizen science and the sort of the power and the wisdom of crowds put to good use. But we also some of us occasionally get hammered by an internet troll or have been part either targets of or witnesses of a sort of uncivil, aggressive, offensive, harmful behavior. Questions abound about even the role that social media may have in this rising level of even mental health issues among teenagers, especially teenage girls, not only. But so first of all, I know you've studied trolls, and who are these people? Are they like normal people? What motivates a troll? Because you have the troll and then you have the design of the platform that allows the trolling, right?
Yeah, you have both. You know, I have studied conspiracy theorists more than trolls.
Uh-huh.
And those are definitely two different phenomena. I think that there are elements of the design of these platforms that can lead to positive reinforcement for bad behavior. And we as designers, the burden is on us to redesign the platforms to create incentives towards better behavior. And it's an art and a science, and I think it's still in its infancy.
Do you believe AI, machine learning holds some promise in the design of these platforms? Can AI help us filter out untruths, conspiracies, or trolls, if you will? What's the promise of that? Do you think there's
I think
hope?
AI tools are critical, but that what we really need is mixed initiative systems where there is a partnership between an AI tool and a human in the loop. My student Camille Harris just published a paper on why there are so many false positives for hate speech detectors on African American English. So people will be having a normal conversation in African American English and their comments get taken down as hate speech and there's nothing hateful about them. And it's because the training data that was used to train the hate speech filter is poor. So these AI tools need a lot of work, and they work better when we have a partnership between the machine and a human.
You also found very interesting. You talk about the design, but also even the business model that these platforms have, right? I think recently, I think you may have tweeted something about, like, let's say when Instagram changes its rules, right? We just until a few weeks ago, Instagram will only offer you the content of the people you've chosen to follow. And now with these reels, it just does like TikTok, it just gives you whatever it is that they think you might want to watch. I mean, that's a pretty significant change in the experience. How do those different models affect then what happens in those platforms?
You know, a lot of what I wrote about in the book is stuff I teach in my class. And when I got to the section on how to manage bad behavior, I used a framework by law professor Larry Lessig to say the things that regulate content are social norms, rules, technology, and business. And as I wrote the section on how business models regulate content, it grew and grew and grew. And I realized in a lot of ways that is much more central to what's wrong with the internet than I had realized before I wrote the book. I believe that a corporation motivated by maximizing targeted advertising revenue can never do the right thing for individuals or for communities. For example, let's talk about what happened in Myanmar. There was a genocide in Myanmar that was facilitated by Facebook. And Facebook had not invested much in language tools in Burmese and had not invested in many Burmese-speaking moderators. From a purely business perspective, that's the right thing to do. It's a tiny market. It barely matters. If you're just thinking as a shareholder of Meta Incorporated, of course, that's what you should do. Why should I throw money away at a tiny, insignificant market? But it turns out that people actually were murdered as a result. The fault, I don't think, is with the Meta executives. I think the fault is with the whole notion that our information space can be a for-profit enterprise. I believe that we need more nonprofit venues supported by values, where information is too important to be just in the service of targeted advertising. If we can say, this platform has a set of values and I want to promote those values. And by the way, there are other platforms with different values. Pick the one that suits you. I also think that we need regulation of these platforms, and what form that will take is outside my area of expertise, I would say. But there should have been some regulation that said you need more people who speak Burmese, because otherwise some bad things might happen.
It's an interesting idea of whether Wikipedia would have had the success it has had it been the creation of a for-profit company. I guess we would never know, but.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If Facebook had been a not-for-profit.
A non-profit, right. You also talk, I did not know this, but the fact that there are pages in Wikipedia that lay out the expected behaviors and the rules of engagement, and that those pages themselves are wikis that can be edited by the people.
Yeah, right. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
They actually, I asked them to take my birthday off of my Wikipedia page, and I went to the policy on biography of living people and said, hey, I think having my birthday online puts me at greater risk for identity theft. Would you please remove it? And the people on the biographies of living people discussed it, and they agreed, and they changed the policy, and they took my birthday not only out of my page, but out of the history of the page. It's really quite impressive.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to invite both folks who are watching online, but also in the room to think about your questions. If you do have a question, a microphone will find you. So start thinking about that. And while you think about that, just you have one of your closing chapter headings in the book is a big, how can we help the internet bring the best in us? That's a big question.
It's a big question.
How do we there's some students here, grad students, people who are heading very soon to grad school to put their time and energy in investigating some of these things. Give us some hints of where some of these answers might be.
I think that what we do as scholars of social computing matters, and that we can study the ways in which design features of online sites lead to different patterns of human behavior, and engineer new ways, design and engineer new ways to bring out better aspects of people. And I think that's our shared undertaking, and there's a lot of promise there. There's a lot of positive good to do.
Any questions? Think about, there's one over here. If someone would bring the microphone so that the folks online can hear, just let us know who you are.
Hello. Thank you very much for everything, for that talk. It was very interesting. I wanted to ask something that you may not have given a thought, or yes, I don't know. what would be a great way, an efficient way of making people, especially from a young age, understand the perils that are involved in all of these, say, networks, and how to use information properly, rather than going from a global perspective? How would an individual be able to have these perils?
How do we teach it to
Yeah,
teenagers?
how
That's a
do
very good, interesting
Yeah,
question. We all struggle with.
it's a really interesting and important question. And I would say that the problem is that eh, sometimes when well-meaning people implement curricula for things like this, it ends up being uh, boring and formulaic and not something that has as much impact. Uh, I think we need to start early, and that there is a very large educational technology research problem for how to make effective training that gets people's attention. And I would say, I would like to educate people not just about how to stay safe, but also about how to reflect on the impact you're having and how to have a positive impact on the people around you that you interact with through the internet. And we can train people to say, look at what you're contributing. See if you can make a positive difference. We can't expect people to know, to be that reflective about it. And I think, so that the trick is, sometimes people will say, oh, we have to solve the problem of, just to pick a random thing, ethics, right? Of ethics in the workplace. And then someone creates a really painful video and makes everyone watch it and answer multiple choice questions. And you say, uh, wow, no, that didn't help. That was just painful. This is a hard design problem. Uh, and those kinds of training programs, I think you have to think about active learning. I think you have to think about it being woven through lots of different curricula and not just a standalone. By the way, we have 2 classes on internet behavior and safety, and now we're done. It's got to be more woven through.
Maybe there's an opportunity for a nonprofit social media platform for preteens that sort of gets you into a healthier way of interaction.
Yeah, there
Maybe that.
are some of the existing platforms that serve that age group are kind of awful.
Okay, so
it's
there's an opportunity. There you go.
It's an interesting question. I assign my students in online communities class to look at a site called Habbo, which is just painful. It's just the worst parts of middle school amped up a level. And I assign it to them to say, look, this is the internet is not all for you. Who is served by this site? Why is it as awful as it is? I think there's some serious design challenges to
Yep.
designing for that particular group.
Do we have any questions coming from online or not so far? I have, there's one right here. And if not, I also have a question that I want to.
Yeah, hi. I'm interested if it's not private companies in the next 5, 10, 15 years that are going to be running social media platforms, what are other possible power structures that could make these platforms run in a healthier way?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for nonprofits. And they do need a business model. And it would be nice if the business model wasn't advertising support. Even a subscription model tends to be a little bit better for users than a advertising model. Because when you have a subscription model, you're saying they're paying me money monthly to use my service. And so I want to create a service that meets the needs of the people who are paying me. So the incentive structure is a little more parallel, a little more in sync. So yeah, I think nonprofits could help. It's funny. I've had wonderful reviews of the book. The one critical comment in one review by one of our PhD alums, Andrew Miller, wrote in his review, "I love the book, but Amy doesn't pay enough attention to the power of regulation. And I think Andrew's right. And I think I didn't write enough about the power of regulation because I don't understand it. So someone who understands government regulation better than me should map out what government can do to do things like saying, no, you need more people who speak Burmese if you're going to have a social media site in Myanmar. How can regulation help? Well, first we need to understand what the potential harms are, and then understand how regulation can ameliorate them without also stifling innovation.
Like one, I think, I forgot the platform you mentioned, but there's one that you pay $9 to be a member of, and then if you get kicked out, then you have to pay the $9 again to go back in.
Yes, that's
yeah.
the Something Awful forums.
Oh, there you go.
And we have a paper that came out of my online communities class by Jessica Pater et al. And Beth Minot and I, called Just Awful Enough, which uses the Something Awful forums as a model for everything you think you know about what makes a good design might be wrong.
So if anybody thinks that the world of social media is already done because the metas of the world and the Twitters of the world have taken care of, I think again, there's a huge opportunity. That's awesome. I guess there's a question coming from online.
Yes, we do. So this question is there a difference in the US and Europe, their approaches to these questions? It seems that Europe may be ahead of the US here.
The regulatory environment is dramatically different, particularly there's much greater privacy protections in the EU through the GDPR. Whether those privacy protections work in practice is an empirical question I would love to see more studies of. And it's interesting that because every environment is international, the regulatory environment we establish in one place impacts the design of a site in the other, because companies don't want to localize for different laws in different districts, although sometimes they have to. So yes, it's different. And I certainly think the GDPR is a nice model for privacy protection that goes beyond American regulation. But there are many dimensions to this.
One additional question I have is that, and there was a research that you mentioned in the book that also left me reflecting on this for a long time, which is that the fact that our interactions online can affect our behavior even outside in the real world, if you will, or outside of online. How, for example, if you're very active on Twitter, which I am, and I think anybody who's been active on Twitter, occasionally you get zings back at you. They were less likely to even express political views in a social setting as a consequence of that. So the implications of getting social media right are even bigger and more profound than we had anticipated. It's not just that bad social media can help bad things happen within social media. It's like there's a spillover effect.
Yeah, there's a phenomenon in sociology called the spiral of silence. And the more that you are aware that your views might be unpopular with other people, the more that you hesitate to express them. And there's a wonderful study by Keith Hampton at Michigan State who found that if you spend more time online, you're more likely to become self-conscious about your views possibly being unpopular. And as a result, you're less likely to express those views either online or in person.
So instead of encouraging you because you're more active, it has the opposite effect. Terrific. Any other thoughts? Well, I want to give you the last word. If there are many, whether it's undergraduate or graduate students who are listening to this, what will be your word of encouragement about all the amazing big questions that remain to be answered in this space?
I guess I want to close by thanking all those students. A lot of the ideas in the book came out of dialogue between me and grad students in my lab and students in my classes. And it's a great privilege to teach all the incredibly sharp Georgia Tech students. And I do think there is a lot of socially positive work to do. We don't know what, we're just at the beginning of building an internet that helps us all to be better people as individuals and communities. And it's the work of all of us to explicitly focus on that and wake up in the morning and say, what can I do to make a positive difference? And what you guys all do really matters. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And if you haven't yet, do not miss Amy Bruckman's Should You Believe Wikipedia online communities and the construction of knowledge. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.